The fabric of the dress was a lie. It was dark red, the color of a confident heart, of wine and celebration, and Izzy had chosen it months ago, dreaming of this exact evening, of the fairy lights strung between ancient oak trees and the scent of night-blooming jasmine. She had imagined dancing in it with Mark, her fiancé, the smooth silk whispering against her skin with every turn. Now the dress felt like a costume for a tragedy. She was being forced to watch from the front row. A single hot tear escaped her control. Tracing a path through her carefully applied makeup, she didn't bother to wipe it away. It was a small liquid truth in a sea of beautiful, suffocating lies. Ahead of her, under a cascade of white roses, Mark was slipping a ring onto her cousin's finger, onto Clara's finger. The minister's voice was a warm, gentle drone, speaking of forever and faithfulness. Every word was a tiny, sharp stone thrown at her chest. Anais's gaze was locked on Mark's hands, the same hands that had held hers just 2 weeks ago, swearing it was all a mistake, a misunderstanding. He'd said the wedding was off, that he needed time. He had lied. He had stood in her apartment, surrounded by the life they had built. And he had lied. Her own engagement ring felt like a brand of ice on her right hand, where she'd shoved it after seeing the wedding invitation addressed to her. A pity invite to her own stolen future. Clara's smile was radiant, a beacon of pure, unadulterated joy that felt like a personal cruelty. Had she ever loved her? Anais wondered. Had any of it been real? The crowd murmured its approval as the vows were exchanged. Polite applause broke the spell. Anais remained perfectly still, a statue carved from grief, in a blood-red dress. Her vision blurred, the fairy lights turning into shimmering, indistinct stars. She was aware of the people around her, the rustle of expensive fabrics, the clink of champagne glasses. They were all part of the performance, and she was the ghost at the feast. That's when she felt it. A gaze. It was different from the pitying glances of distant relatives or the nervous avoidance from friends who had chosen sides. This was heavy, intent. It wasn't on the bride and groom. It was on her. She forced herself to turn her head slowly, as if moving through water. Her eyes scanned the manicured lawn, past the smiling faces, and landed on a man standing near the back, partially obscured by the shadow of an oak tree. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't clapping. He was simply watching her. He was in a suit, a cut so sharp and severe it seemed to absorb the soft evening light. It was a Tom Ford, she noted with a detached part of her brain, the part that still appreciated design and form. Black silk, single button. His posture was one of absolute stillness, an island of unnerving calm in the celebratory tide. Her eyes traveled up from the perfect suit to his face. He was German, with sharp, Teutonic features that looked as though they'd been carved from something hard and unforgiving. His blonde hair was styled immaculately, but it was his eyes that held her. They were a piercing, depthless blue, and they were fixed on the single tear tracking down her cheek. He wasn't looking at her with pity. It was something else. Recognition, maybe, or possession. She didn't know him. She was sure she'd never seen him before. He was likely a business associate of Mark's father, a man whose entire life was a collection of transactional relationships. She broke eye contact, her heart hammering against her ribs for a new and entirely different reason. The feeling of being watched didn't go away. It intensified, a physical pressure against her skin. The reception was a blur of forced smiles and champagne. Anais found a secluded corner on the terrace, hoping to become invisible. The jasmine was cloying now, its sweetness a mockery. She just needed to get through the next hour. Then she could go home, peel off this lying dress, and shatter. Anais. Mark's voice. She didn't turn. Go away, Mark. Please, just let me explain. He sounded pathetic, his voice thin and reedy. She finally looked at him, at his perfectly tailored tuxedo, the white rose pinned to his lapel. He was the image of a storybook groom, a fraud. Explain what? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Explain how you were planning our future while you were sleeping with my cousin. Explain the date you picked, the venue we chose together. What exactly is there to explain? It's not that simple. My father, there were pressures. Business things, she repeated, the words tasting like ash. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. 2 weeks ago, the night he'd broken it off, he'd been on the phone with his father, his voice tight with stress. He thought she was asleep. She'd heard phrases she didn't understand, something about a shipment from Hamburg, a debt to the von Hess family, and how a marriage alliance to Clara's family would solve everything. You mean the debt your father owes the von Hess family? She said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. That business thing? Mark's face went white. All the color drained from his skin, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. How did you hear that? You talk in your sleep, she lied, wanting to wound him. And you talk when you think no one is listening. He looked around wildly, his eyes darting through the crowd as if searching for a predator. You can't say that name here. Anais, you have no idea what you're talking about. I know enough, she whispered, the fight suddenly draining out of her. I know you're a coward, and that's all I ever need to know. She turned and walked away, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. She didn't look back. She just wanted out. She pushed through the laughing guests, her red dress a slash of color in a pastel landscape. Her car was in the guest parking lot, a small island of freedom. She was fumbling for her keys when a long black sedan pulled up, blocking her in. It was a Mercedes Maybach S-Class, gleaming like polished obsidian under the valet lights. The engine was silent. The back door opened, and the man from the oak tree stepped out. He moved with an unnerving grace, the shadows clinging to him. Up close, he was even more imposing. The scent of him reached her first expensive cologne, with a clean, sharp note of cedar and something darker, like smoke. You are leaving so soon. His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated in the air between them. His English was perfect, with no discernible accent, yet it sounded foreign, shaped by a different rhythm. Excuse me, she said, trying to sidle past him. I need to get to my car. He didn't move. He was a wall of black silk and unyielding presence. I don't think so. I don't know who you are, but you're in my way. His dark eyes held hers. That same unnerving intensity was there, but now it was closer, inescapable. My name is Falk von Hess, he said, his voice quiet. And you just made yourself my business. He glanced back toward the reception, a flicker of something cold and calculating in his expression. You said my name. You spoke of my family's affairs. Now you will come with me, and you will explain exactly what else you know. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. The world tilted on its axis. The jasmine-scented air suddenly felt thin and cold. Her stolen future had just been replaced by a terrifying, uncertain present. Falk von Hess had chosen her, and she had the sinking feeling she had no choice at all. The ride was silent. Anais sat pressed against the door of the Maybach, the supple leather cold against her arms. The city lights of Los Angeles smeared past the tinted windows, a river of gold and white that felt a world away. She could feel Falk's presence beside her. He didn't look at her, just stared straight ahead, his profile stern and unreadable in the intermittent glow of the streetlights. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with unspoken threats, and an attention so thick she could barely breathe. She thought about screaming. She had walked from one cage straight into another. They didn't go to a warehouse or a grimy basement like in the movies. They pulled into the private underground garage of a skyscraper that pierced the downtown skyline. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment that was less a home and more a monument to cold, minimalist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the sprawling city. The furniture was all sharp angles and muted colors. Black, gray, chrome. There were no photographs, no clutter, no sign that a human being actually lived here. It was as beautiful and sterile as a high-end prison. Falk finally spoke, his voice echoing slightly in the vast bass. Sit. He gestured to a severe black leather sofa. Anais remained standing. I want to go home. He turned to face her fully. In the stark light of the penthouse, she could see a faint silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection in his otherwise flawless, intimidating face. Your home is no longer safe for you, he said, his tone flat. The people Mark's father is involved with, they are not forgiving. You spoke of a debt. You spoke my name. They will see you as a loose end. This has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you now. He loosened his tie with a single, sharp tug. You will stay here. My men will watch the building. You will be safe. Safe? She let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. I'm your prisoner. You are my guest, he corrected, his voice dangerously soft. A guest who holds dangerous information. For now, that is all you need to be. He walked over to a wet bar and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass. He didn't offer her one. He drank it in one smooth motion, his eyes never leaving her face. The control he exerted was absolute, from the stillness of his body to the precise, economical way he moved. He was a predator, and she was in his den. Days bled into one another. Anais existed in the silent, air-conditioned luxury of the penthouse. A quiet, older woman came each morning to prepare food and leave it for her, never speaking a word. Falk was often gone, but his presence lingered like the scent of his cologne. She had access to a tablet, and she devoured the news, trying to piece together who he was. His name, von Hess, was never mentioned, but she read about the sudden, violent collapse of a rival import-export business, about a key witness in a financial crimes case who had a fatal accident. She started to connect the dots. He wasn't just a businessman. He was an emperor, ruling a hidden, violent world. One afternoon, while searching for a book on one of the sparsely populated shelves, she found something tucked away behind a row of leather-bound classics. It was a small silver picture frame, face down. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The photograph was of a younger Falk. He was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his face, making him look almost boyish. His arm was around a woman with bright, laughing eyes and a cascade of dark hair. They were on a beach somewhere, the sun glowing on their skin. They looked happy, in love. He was different then. Anais jumped, whirling around. The older guard who was always stationed by the elevator, a man she'd nicknamed Gunter in her head, was standing in the doorway. He had never spoken to her before. Before she was taken from him, Gunter continued, his voice raspy with age and regret. He looked at the photograph in her hand, his expression softening with a deep, ancient sadness. He blames himself. He was the head of the family, but he could not protect his own wife. They used her to hurt him. It worked. A broken German industrialist with a criminal empire. The thought echoed in her mind. This was his wound. This was the ghost that haunted this sterile apartment. The reason for his coldness. His obsessive need for control. He had failed to protect the woman he loved, and he had rebuilt himself from the ashes of that failure into something hard and impenetrable. Suddenly, a piercing alarm blared through the penthouse, a shrill, insistent shriek. Red lights flashed along the ceiling. Gunter stiffened, his hand immediately going to a weapon under his jacket. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice now steel. He moved toward the main living area, pushing her behind him. Through the windows, Anais could see the flicker of movement on an adjacent rooftop, a glint of metal. Gunshots erupted, shattering one of the massive windows. Glass exploded inward. Anais screamed, dropping to the floor. Gunter returned fire, shouting commands in German into a device on his wrist. The penthouse, her gilded cage, had been breached. The danger Falk had spoken of was no longer an abstract threat. It was here, in the chaos. She saw her chance. The service elevator door, the one the quiet woman used, was slightly ajar. Freedom was 10 feet away. She could crawl there, slip out, and disappear into the city. She could run, but then she saw Gunter stumble, a dark stain spreading on his shirt. Falk burst in from his private study, a gun in his hand, moving with a fluid, lethal grace that was terrifying to behold. He took a position, firing with disciplined precision. Another man, one of his soldiers, was hit and went down. Amid the gunfire and shouting, Falk was hit. A piece of shrapnel from a ricocheting bullet sliced across his forearm. He grunted in pain, but his aim never wavered. Anais froze. Her heart was a frantic bird against her ribs. "Run!" Her mind screamed, but her body wouldn't obey. She looked at the open service door, then back at Falk, blood dripping from his arm onto the pristine white marble floor. She made a choice. Scrambling on her hands and knees, she moved away from the door, toward the bathroom. She threw open the cabinet, grabbing the first aid kit. Her hands were shaking, but her purpose was clear. She crawled back into the living room, a war zone of shattered glass and upturned furniture. Just as the last of the attackers was neutralized, silence descended, broken only by the lingering alarm and the ragged sound of breathing. Falk was standing over the body of one of the intruders, his expression a mask of cold fury. He saw her then, huddled on the floor with the white medical box clutched in her hands. He walked over to her, his gun still held loosely at his side. He looked down at her, then at the open service door, then back to her. He knew she could have left. Without a word, he sat on the edge of the sofa as she began to clean the gash. The scent of him filled her senses, cedar, smoke, and now the sharp, metallic tang of blood. Her touch was hesitant at first, then grew steady. He didn't flinch. He just watched her, his piercing blue eyes intense, searching her face for something she couldn't name. The world narrowed to the space between them, the quiet intimacy of her tending to his wound. The remnants of the gunfight faded into the background. There was only the scrape of the wipe against his skin, the soft rustle of the bandage, and the charged silence. Their faces were inches apart. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She risked a glance up at him. His gaze was locked on hers, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something other than control in their depths. A crack in the fortress. He said her name. Just her name. Anais. It was a low murmur, a sound that was less a word and more a physical sensation. It was nothing like the way Mark had said it. He said it like it belonged to him. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his world, she knew her choice to stay had changed everything. A few days later, the broken window replaced and all evidence of the attack erased, Falk finally told her why she was so important. They were standing on the balcony, the night air cool against her skin. The city below was a galaxy of indifferent lights. The words you said to Mark at the wedding, he began, not looking at her, about the shipment from Hamburg. It was a code, a confirmation of a deal his father was making behind my back with a rival. Anais stared at him. A deal? A betrayal, he corrected, his voice hard. Mark's father was selling information routes, schedules. He was helping the Eberhardt family dismantle my organization from the inside. Your fiancé repeating that phrase to his father was the final piece of evidence I needed. You are the only person outside of my inner circle who heard it spoken. You are a witness, whether you want to be or not. The weight of his words settled on her. This wasn't just about a debt. It was about a war. And she was standing in the middle of it. The stakes were no longer just her safety, but the stability of his entire empire. The Eberhardt family, now exposed and desperate, grew bolder. The next attack came when they were in transit. Anais had insisted on getting fresh air, and Falk, in a rare moment of concession, had agreed to a drive along the coast. The black Maybach was flanked by 2 other vehicles full of his men, a rolling fortress. It wasn't enough. On a winding stretch of road, a dump truck came out of nowhere, slamming into the lead car and blocking the road. Men with automatic weapons poured out from the trees. Falk's driver swerved, the tires screaming, but they were pinned. Falk roared, shoving Anais to the floor of the car and covering her body with his own. The world exploded in a cacophony of gunfire and shattering glass. The car shook with the impact of bullets. She could feel the solid, reassuring weight of him, the tension in his muscles as he shielded her. His scent filled her senses, a strange anchor in the chaos. He was firing back through the broken window, his movements precise and deadly, but they were outnumbered. A bullet grazed his shoulder, and he grunted, a sharp intake of breath. Seeing him hurt again sent a spike of pure, cold terror through her. It was a fear more potent than the one she felt for her own life. Through the shattered back window, Anais saw it. The attackers had a getaway van parked on a side road, its engine running. They were being boxed in. Falk was focused on the men in front. They needed a diversion. Her mind raced. Anais was not a fighter. She was a student, a girl who liked gardenias and quiet afternoons. But that girl was gone. In her place was someone else. Someone forged in fear and proximity to this dangerous man. She saw a heavy-duty fire extinguisher bolted to the floor near her feet. While Falk was reloading, she acted. She unlatched the extinguisher, her movements clumsy but desperate. "Cover me," she gasped. He gave her a sharp, questioning look. But there was no time. He laid down a spray of covering fire. Anazi scrambled out of the car, staying low. The noise was deafening. The air smelled of cordite and gasoline. She ran, not toward safety, but toward a parked, expensive-looking convertible on the side of the road. It was a stupid, reckless act, but it was the only thing she could think of. She swung the heavy extinguisher, putting all her fear and rage into the motion, and brought it down on the car's windshield. It shattered with a satisfyingly loud crash. She swung again, hitting the hood. The car's alarm shrieked to life, a new, piercing sound that cut through the gunfire. The flashing headlights created a chaotic strobe effect. It was the distraction they needed. Two of the gunmen turned toward the sound, confused. It was all the opening Falk's men required. They flanked the remaining attackers, and the firefight was over in seconds. Silence fell, thick and ringing. Falk was at her side instantly, pulling her back toward their car. He checked her for injuries, his hands moving over her arms and back, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough. He broke off, his voice low. "You look at me, and you don't see a monster. Why?" She finished tying the bandage, her fingers brushing against his skin. She didn't look up at him. She couldn't. The question was too raw, too close to the heart of what was happening between them. "I see a man who built a fortress around a wound," she answered, her own voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I'm just tired of seeing the walls. I'm looking for the man inside." That was her confession. Not of love, but of seeing him. Truly seeing him. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with an emotion she couldn't place. "The man inside is more dangerous than the walls." The Eberhardt family, beaten back but not defeated, changed their strategy. They couldn't get to Falk, and they now knew Anais was not a passive pawn. So, they reached back into her old life, into the life she thought she'd left behind at that wedding. A message arrived on a burner phone one of Falk's men gave her. It was a single image, a photograph of her cousin Clara, laughing as she walked out of a coffee shop. On her forehead, a crudely drawn red cross from a photo editing app. The message beneath it was simple. "We know where to find her. Your choice." The blood drained from Anais's face. They were targeting her family. They were going to use the people who had betrayed her to destroy her new reality. The war was no longer just his. It was deeply, terrifyingly personal. The picture of Clara was an act of war. It was a line Falk's enemies had crossed, and Anais knew with chilling certainty that he would not let it stand. He planned a response with surgical precision, his team moving with the silent, deadly efficiency of a wolf pack. The target was the head of the Eberhardt family, a man who would be attending a private gala at a luxury hotel. A hotel Anais knew intimately. "I'm going with you," she said, standing before Falk in his makeshift command center, maps and blueprints spread across a vast table. He didn't even look up. No, the Westmoreland Grand. Mark's father co-owned it. For my final project in my landscape architecture program, I redesigned their rooftop gardens and service access points. I know every back corridor, every dumbwaiter, every blind spot in their security camera coverage. You don't. He finally raised his head, his dark eyes boring into hers. He saw the resolve there, the hard line of her jaw. She was no longer the weeping girl in the red dress. He had reforged her in the fire of his world, and now she was as unyielding as he was. "This is not a game, Anais." He sent me a picture of my cousin with a target on her head. This stopped being a game for me then. He studied her for a long, silent moment. Then he gave a single, sharp nod. "Stay by my side. You do exactly as I say." The gala was a glittering affair, a masquerade of wealth and power. Anais wore a simple black gown, her hair pulled back, an earpiece hidden in her ear. She was Falk's shadow, moving through the crowd at his side. He introduced her to no one. Her presence alone was a statement. This woman is with me. She is untouchable. The plan was simple. Falk would meet with Eberhardt in a private suite to negotiate a truce. His men would be in position. But things went wrong almost immediately. It was a trap. As they entered the suite, the doors locked behind them. Eberhardt's men emerged from hidden rooms, guns raised, and there in the center of the room was Eberhardt himself, a smug, cruel-looking man. He was holding Clara, a knife pressed to her throat. Her cousin was pale with terror, tears streaming down her face. Mark was there too, crumpled in a corner, sobbing. The great Falk von Hesse, Eberhard sneered, brought to his knees by a woman. Two, it would seem. He gestured with the knife toward Anais. Drop your weapon, or the family reunion gets messy. Falk's face was a mask of stone, but Anais could feel the rage radiating from him. He slowly placed his gun on the floor. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, a silent communication passing between them. This was her moment. Eberhard was gloating, focused on Falk. He didn't see her as a threat. She subtly touched her earpiece, speaking in a low, calm voice to Falk's men on the outside. Phase 2, West Terrace fire alarm. Now, she knew the hotel system. A fire alarm on the terrace wouldn't trigger the sprinklers in the suite, but it would set off a piercing alarm and flashing strobes, and it would automatically dispatch the fire department. It would create chaos. Seconds later, the alarm shrieked. The strobes began to flash, disorienting everyone. In the confusion, Anais moved, not toward the fight, but toward the suite's media console. She had seen the schematics. She knew it controlled the large screen on the wall. With trembling fingers, she typed a command into her burner phone, activating a pre-recorded video file she had prepared. The huge screen behind Eberhard flickered to life. It showed a live feed or what looked like one of police tactical teams swarming the hotel lobby. It was a bluff, a clever fake she'd downloaded, but in the flashing lights and chaos, it looked real. Eberhard and his men instinctively turned toward the screen. The hesitation was all Falk needed. He moved like a blur, a phantom of violence. He disarmed the man nearest to him. And in two precise, brutal movements, the immediate threat was over. He had Eberhard by the throat, the man's own knife in his hand. The rest of Eberhard's men, seeing their boss captured and hearing the approaching sirens, real ones this time, dropped their weapons. It was over. Clara collapsed, sobbing, into Mark's arms. They both stared at Anais, not with gratitude, but with a mixture of fear and awe. She was a stranger to them now, a creature from a world they couldn't comprehend. Falk ignored them. He walked straight to Anais, his eyes scanning her, checking for any sign of harm. His hands came up to cup her face, his touch firm, possessive. The mask was gone. In his eyes, she saw the raw, unguarded truth. He had almost lost her. He didn't say, "Thank you." He didn't say, "I love you." He said something far more potent. His voice a low promise meant only for her. "You are mine," he said. The words a brand on her soul. That is not a cage. It is a promise. It was an acknowledgement, a coronation. She was not just his captive or his guest. She was his queen. The cost of that crown was her old life. She saw it in the way Clara flinched when she looked at her. She heard it in the silence from her family in the weeks that followed. The girl who designed gardens and dreamed of a white picket fence was gone. A ghost of a memory. The price she paid was her innocence. The price he paid was his solitude. He had let someone pass the walls of his fortress, making himself vulnerable for the first time since the woman in the photograph. He had given her a piece of his power, and in doing so, had bound himself to her. They weren't in the city anymore. He had taken her to a house nestled in the hills, a place of quiet gardens and traditional German architecture. It was a sanctuary, a world away from the violence and the concrete. She stood on the veranda, looking out at the moon-drenched landscape. She was sketching in a notebook, not a garden for a client, but one for herself, a place to grow something new. He came to stand beside her, not in a suit, but in a simple dark shirt and trousers. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He followed her gaze to the moon, a silent partner in her contemplation. The silence between them was no longer a weapon or a void. It was a shared language, a space they had built together out of wreckage and blood. She didn't reach for his hand, but she leaned into his presence, a subtle shift of weight that said everything. This was her choice. Not to run, not to hide, but to stay. To stand beside this broken, dangerous man who had seen the steel in her and claimed it as his own. In the quiet dark, under the watchful eye of the moon, she was finally home.